Alright, so we are halfway through building our video detail page. So what I'm going to do now is to copy some HTML and CSS to make our video detail page look more similar to YouTube, right? So I'm going to open GitHub GIS, and from there I'm going to copy mainly the code for two files, video detail component.html. So for that, I'm just going to click on the section raw here, and you can see the whole HTML code for the video detail component HTML page. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to go to the video detail component HTML file and just replace everything with the code which I've copied from the GitHub GIS page, right? So it's just mainly building upon the code which we have built in the previous part, where we are displaying first the video player if the video URL is available, like once we are reading the video metadata from the server, and after that we are displaying the title of the video. So here it's of course hard coded, so I'm just going to remove this and I'm going to show the video title instead of the hard coded title. And in here we also have the hard coded view count, so I'm just going to delete the view count and add the view count which we are reading from the backend. Next we have the like and dislike section, where we are mainly displaying two buttons. The one button which has the matte icon button class as thumbs up, because of course you know that the YouTube video we have two icons, thumbs up and thumbs down. As we are using the icons used by Angular material, so we're just going to mention the class as thumbs up, and we have some area label tag here, attribute here. We don't need this for now, so I'm just going to remove this code. And inside this button we have the icon, matte icon tag here, and inside this matte icon tag we are showing the thumb up of alt. This is the text which will display the thumbs up icon inside the button. And inside the button we are also displaying the like count for this particular video. Similarly, we also have a button for the dislike count. So the matte icon is going to be matte thumb down of alt. This is the text which displays the thumbs down icon. Similarly, I'm just also going to remove the area label attribute. And we are also displaying the dislike count of this particular video inside the button. And if you just scroll down, we have a matte divider, so that we can just divide these sections so that it won't look cluttered inside the video, inside the page. All these attributes don't look cluttered. We are just going to add a divider. After the divider, we have the matte card header, where we are displaying the title of the video. So here it's going to be the title of the author of the video. And inside the matte card subtitle, we are showing the number of subscribers to the channel. And we also have two buttons here, one with subscribe button and another with subscribed button. Like if the user is not yet subscribed to the channel, we are showing the subscribe. We'll show the subscribe button. And if the user is already subscribed, of course, we show the subscribed button. And we also have some CSS classes. We'll copy this shortly. And after that, we have the div tag, where we are showing the description of the video, followed by the divider again. And after that, we have an tag called as matte chip list. So this is the same matte chip list we saw when in the upload in the edit video metadata component. So we're just going to display all the tags inside the component matte chip. Right, and now I'm also going to copy the CSS code from the video detail component.css file inside the GitHub GIS. So similarly, I'm just going to click on raw button and copy all the CSS from here, and I'm going to open IntelliJ and paste it inside the video detail.component.css file. After we updated both these files with this code, let's open our application in the browser, and now you can see that the video detail page looks somewhat similar to YouTube. We have the title of the video, the view count, the like and dislike buttons. If you click on them, these two icons, these two buttons are doing nothing. We will make them functional soon. We have the name of the channel followed by the subscribers. These are hard coded. And we also have two buttons, subscribe and subscribed. And below these two buttons, we have the video description. And then we have the two tags, which we have hard coded, Spring Boot and Angular. If you have any doubts about how this HTML and CSS is implemented, you can just write a comment, leave a comment and mention me. You can use this button and you can mention me and write a comment. Then I will try to help you. Similarly, also for the HTML file, we also have a comment section here. So you can just write your comments and mention me and I will try to help you as soon as possible. Alright, so now it's time to add some additional functionality to our video detail page. So we are going to start with implementing the like and the dislike count functionality. I'm just going to open IntelliJ, and in here we have these two buttons, the like count and the dislike count. And in here I'm just going to add, for the button tag, I'm just going to add the click directive. And the click directive is going to call a method called as like video, which should be defined inside the video detail component.ts file. So I'm just going to press Alt Enter and select create method like video, and a method will be created inside the video detail component.ts file. And in here I'm going to make a call to the backend through the video service. So I'm just going to type in this dot video service dot like video. Right, and into this video like video method, I'm just going to pass in the video ID, as this is what we need in the backend to increase the like count of a video. So if you open the video controller, you can see that inside the API definition, we are taking a video ID as a path variable. So I'm just going to pass in the video ID to the like video method. And this like video method is still not existing inside the video service class. So I'm just going to create method called like video. And this like video method, inside this like video method, we are going to make a HTTP post call, right? So I'm just going to go inside the like video method. I'm going to type in return this dot HTTP client dot post, and I'm going to type in the URL as http localhost 8080 /API/videos, and I'm going to assign the video ID to the URL, and I'm going to end with /like. For this post call, as we don't have any body, I'm just going to pass null as a body, and that's it, right? So if you open the video controller class, you can see that we are returning a video DTO as a response whenever we are calling the like video endpoint, right? So for this reason, I'm just going to add the generic arguments here inside the post method call for the HTTP client as video DTO, so that Angular will understand that the response which you are receiving from backend for the like video endpoint is going to be of type video DTO, right? So now I'm going to define the return type as an observable of video DTO, right? And similarly, we also have to create a method for dislike video. So I'm just going to copy this like video method, and I'm going to name it as dislike video with a capital L. And inside the method, I'm just going to change the /like text to /dislike. If I go to the video controller, you see that we have a dislike with capital L. So make sure that you have also the similar dislike text here. And now we have the two methods, like and dislike. So let's go back to the video detail component.ts file. And in here, as we are returning an observable from the service, from the like video method inside the video service, we have to first subscribe to that observable. So I'm going to type in subscribe. And in here, I'm going to subscribe to the data which is coming as a response from the backend, and I'm going to update the like count from the response which is coming from the backend, And similarly, I'm also going to update the dislike count with the response coming from the backend. So as we have the like video method, similarly, I'm just going to copy this like video method and I'm going to paste in and create a similar method for dislike video. I'm going to call it dislike video with capital L similarly, and I'm going to change this like video method to dislike video method. Right, so we have the both like video and dislike video methods. So I'm just going to go back to the video detail.component.html file, and from here we can now call the dislike video method whenever the dislike button is clicked, right? So let's change this to dislike video. So whenever the user clicks on the thumbs up, we are going to call the like video API, and the like count and the dislike count is going to be updated. And whenever the user clicks on the dislike count, similarly the like and the video dislike count should be updated. So let's test whether this is working correctly or not. So I'm going to open the application, and if I click on the like button, the thumbs up button, you can see that the like count is updated. And if I click on the thumbs down button, the like count is decremented by 1 and the dislike count is displayed as 1. Similarly, let's try again. I'm going to click on the like count button again, and it's working fine. And I'm going to try and click on the like button again one more time, and you can see that the like is taken back. So now we do have 0 likes and 0 dislikes. Alright, so now it's time to implement the subscribe and unsubscribe functionality in our Angular application. So here you can see the subscribe and the subscribed buttons side by side, and we are displaying it both of them at once. So what we have to do is, when the user is not yet subscribed to the channel, we have to show the subscribe button. And once the user clicked on the subscribe button, we'll make a call to the backend to actually subscribe this particular logged in user to the channel. And then we have to show the subscribed button once the user is subscribed to the channel. And likewise, if I click on the subscribe button, then I have to unsubscribe from the channel, and I have to show the subscribe button back again once the user is unsubscribed. Right, so let's implement this logic. So I'm going to open IntelliJ and the video detail component.html file. I'm just going to scroll down until I find this mat card header section, and in here we have this button where we are showing the subscribe button. And here I'm going to again add a click directive, and this is going to refer to a method called as subscribe to user, right? And I'm going to again create this method inside the component subscribe to user, and this time I'm going to call the method subscribe to user, which is not in the video service, but I'm going to create a new service called as a user service, right? So for that, I'm going to open the terminal, and I'm going to open a tab and cd into the front end and YouTube clone UI folder, and in here I'm going to generate a new service called as user service, right? So for that, I'm going to type in nggs user. So this would be ng generate service user, and if I press enter, this will create 2 files. One would be the user.service.ts file and the user.service.spec.ts file, which is the test file. All right, so let's check whether this file is created successfully or not. So you can see that we have these 2 files, and let me add this to the Git repository, to my local Git repository, these 2 files. And in here, first we have to make the HTTP call to subscribe to a channel. So for that, we have the API already created in the previous parts. So I have to open the user controller class, and here we have 2 APIs, subscribe and unsubscribe. So we are doing a post mapping, which is taking the user ID as the path variable, right? So let's add a call, HTTP call inside the user service to subscribe to the user. So for that, I need the HTTP client from Angular. So I'm going to type in private HTTP client. So in this way, we can inject the HTTP client into the user service class. And I'm going to create a method called as subscribe to user. And this subscribe to user is going to take in a user ID, as we need to provide the user ID as the path variable. So I'm going to type in user ID, and this would be of type string. And I'm going to make a HTTP post request from the subscribe to user method. So I'm going to type in return this dot HTTP client dot post, and I'm going to make a post call to the URL HTTP localhost 8080 slash. So let's have a look at what is the request mapping. So it's going to be /API /user. So let's go back to the user service. It's going to be /API /user followed by subscribe /user ID. So I'm going to go back to the user service, add this request mapping, add this URL mapping here, and I'm going to assign the user ID to the URL, right? And the body of this request is going to be null, as we are just passing the user ID as the path variable and nothing else. So I'm just going to, so this will make the post call to the REST endpoint where we can subscribe to the user, and it will return a response back. What kind of response we are receiving? So we are just receiving a Boolean as a response. So I'm going to add this as a generic argument to the post call, and we are going to return an observable of Boolean from our method, right? I'm just going to add the import statement for observable class from RxJS package. So here we can, instead of adding the capital Boolean with capital B, we can just use the primitive type. So we can do that. All right, so now we can see that the IDE is also not complaining. Let's go back to the video detail.component.ts file. And in here, first, what we have to do is to inject the user service into the video detail component class, right? So for that, I'm just going to add private user service, and I'm going to declare the user service class, and we are going to import the user service from our root package, but not from Angular auth OIDC client package, right? So just make sure you select the right user service class. And after we define the user service, after we injected the user service into the class, go down to the subscribe to user method, and in here I'm going to type in this dot user service dot subscribe to user, and we have to pass in the ID of the user to this method. So how do we get the ID? So we don't have access to the user ID in our Angular application yet, right? So let me show you what I'm talking about. So I've opened the application now, and if you open the dev tools and go to the application tab and access the session storage, if you click on the localhost 4200 in the session storage, you can see the auth configuration here, like the JSON Web Token and all the related auth configuration here. And under the user data, you can see the subject. We have the subject, which coming from the auth0. This is nothing but whatever authentication I've used. It's like a unique identifier of the authentication which I've used. So this is going to be the subject, but this is not the unique identifier in our database, right? So this is not, according to our data model, this is not the unique identifier in our database. If I open the database again, you can see that we are storing the user inside the database, and here we have the ID of the user which we have stored in the database, and the sub is like another unique identifier we have, right? But the actual user ID is the ID which is stored inside the database. So we have to first do two things. The thing is, after logging in our Angular application, we have to store the user information inside the database. That means register the user in our database, and after that get the user ID and store it in our Angular application so that we can reuse it whenever we want to make calls to the backend, right? For this instance, if we want to make a call to the backend to subscribe a particular user to another user, we have to pass in the user ID. So for this reason, the first thing we have to do now is to register the user as soon as the user is logged in, right? So for that, if I open the auth config.module, you can see that the redirect URL So whenever we have performed the login, auth0 will redirect us from the auth0 page to our application, right? So that redirect URL is going to be this window location origin. So this is going to be nothing but localhost 4200. If you remember in our auth0 configuration, so if I open auth0, here we have the configuration for our YouTube clone Angular client. If I just scroll down, you can see that we have the allowed callback URLs, and in here we have provided the callback URL as http localhost 4200. So let me just explain with the diagram this works. So here we have our user, and on the first ever login to our Angular application, so what our Angular application do, it will call the auth0, right? And auth0 will provide us a login page, and there we will log in either through our credentials or using some single sign-on like Facebook or Google login. After completing the login, auth0 will redirect us back to the callback URL, back to the Angular application. So in our case, this would be localhost 4200, right? And after receiving this localhost 4200 request, our Angular application will understand that, okay, this is the callback URL triggered from the Angular application, and it will call the Spring Boot application to register this particular user who is logged in for the first time to the database, right? So after saving the user details in the database, Spring Boot will respond back with the user ID as a response, so that the Angular application will know the user ID of this particular user who is logged in. So now there is a problem in this approach when we are using localhost 4200 as the callback URL, right? So whenever after the user is logged in, after we have registered the user in the database, whenever I refresh the application homepage, it will again call the Spring Boot backend and it will try to register the user, right? So this is a bug. So we have it now in our approach. So what we're going to do is, instead of redirecting from auth0 to localhost 4200, we will redirect back to a different URL. So this URL is going to be I'm going to add /callback here. So after the user logged in after the user has logged in, so we are just going to redirect the page to auth0, and after the successful authentication, auth0 will redirect us back to the localhost 4200 callback URL. And after coming to the callback URL, then we can try to register the user in the database. So to handle this flow, I'm going to create a new component inside our Angular application called as callback. So for that, I'm going to open the terminal, and I'm going to type in nggc, the short form to create a component, and I'm going to call this component as callback. And this will create 4 new files for the callback component, and I'm going to go ahead and add these 4 files to my local Git repository. So the next thing I'm going to do is to create a route inside our app routing module.ts file. So I'm going to open app routing.module.ts file, and I'm going to create a new object with path called as callback, right? So this is going to be callback, and I'm going to assign this path callback to the callback component, right? So whenever auth0 is calling localhost 4200 /callback, we will be triggering the callback component. And if you open the callback component, and in here, whenever we are initializing this callback component, actually we have to call the user, we have to call the Spring Boot backend and register our user inside the database, right? So for that, we can make use of the user service to make that call to the backend. So I'm going to first inject the user service into the component. I'm going to type in user service and define the user service and import it from the root package. And now inside the constructor, I'm going to make a call to the user service. So I'm going to type in this .user service .register user, and I'm going to create this method inside the user service. And this register user method is going to make a HTTP request to our Spring Boot backend. So I'm going to type in return this .http client let's check what kind of HTTP method the register endpoint is serving. So this is going to be a get mapping, and yeah, and this is going to be calling, and this we have to call /API/user/register endpoint, right? So this is going to be http client.get, and we are going to type in http localhost 8080/API/user/register, and as a response we are expecting a user ID as a response. So this is going to be a string, but inside this implementation of the register method, we are returning a hard-coded string called as user registration successful, right? What we want to do is we want to return the user ID instead of returning this hard-coded string. So for that, we have to make some small changes inside the register method. So first of all, in the user registration service, I'm going to go to the register user method. So here you may remember that we are first retrieving the user details by calling the user info endpoint, and after we receive the user details as a user info DTO, we are directly saving these user details into the database, right? So what happens if the user is already saved into the database? We don't want to duplicate the user, right? We don't want to create another user with the same information. So for this reason, we are going to make a check here just before creating the user object and saving it to the database. I'm going to make a check, right? So what kind of check? So I'm just going to verify whether the user with this particular subject is existing already in our database or not. So for that, I'm going to type in user repository .find by sub and provide the subject which is coming in from the user info DTO, so that I'll know that whether the user is already saved. Then I don't need to save it again. I can just return it, the user ID which is existing, back to the client, right? So I'm going to call the find by sub method, and I'm going to store this return variable inside a return value inside a local variable called as user by subject, something like that. And if the user by subject is already present in the database, so for that I can use the isPresent method of optional. Then I just have to return user by subject .get, because then I have to get the object from the optional object, right? So for that I'm just going to use get method, and then I'm going to type in get ID. So this will return the user ID of the user which is already saved in the database. Now you can see that we are receiving an error, compilation error, because this return type of this method is not string, but it's void, right? So for that, I'm just going to change the return type as string, so that we will return the user ID as a return type, as a return value from this method. And lastly, if the user is not yet present, then I want to save the user details in the database, right? So I'm just going to add an else condition here and move this whole piece of code inside the else condition, right? So now once we save the user to the database, I want to return the user ID of the user back to the client again in this else condition, right? So for that, I'm just going to type in after the save method .get ID, and I'm going to add the return statement. This is because the save method of the repository of the Spring Data JPA repository will by default return the object which is saved in the database. So if you see the save method, you can see that it is returning the object which is actually saved into the database. So now we have refactored this method to return the user ID. So now I have to change the user controller so that we will use the return value, the user ID, which is returned from this register user method, right? So I'm going to open the user controller, and I'm just going to simply delete this return statement. I'm just going to add the return statement to the user registration.register user method, so that once the user registration is completed, it will check whether the user is already existing or not, and will provide the user ID back to the client. So now we can call this endpoint inside our user service. So the remaining thing here is we have to define the return type of the response coming from this particular endpoint call, right? So as we already saw, this register method is returning a string. So I can add the generic argument here as string. Here I've made a mistake. It's actually the return statement is not really necessary. And what I can do is I can store the user ID in memory inside the user service. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called as user ID, and I'm going to assign the response which is coming from the backend to this user ID variable, right? So for that, I need to first subscribe to this data which is coming from the backend, right? So for that, I'm going to type in .subscribe, and inside the subscribe method, I'm going to assign the data coming from the backend. So there's going to be this .user ID is going to be data. So in this way, we are maintaining the user ID in memory using the user service. And whenever we want to access a user ID, we can just access this variable, right? But we cannot yet access this variable directly by the variable name because it violates the encapsulation property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new method called as getUserID, right? And this is going to return this .user ID. And the return type of this method is going to be a string. Let's define this. So whenever I want user ID anywhere in the application, I can just call user service.getUserID, and I can receive this user ID and do whatever I want with this user ID, right? And one more thing I want to do is I want to make this user ID as private so that it's not visible outside of this user service class, right? So now we have this user ID. So what I can do is I can go back to the callback. I can go back to the video detail .component.ts file. And in here, where I have to pass the user ID, I can just call user service.getUserID, right? So I'm going to type in this user service.getUserID, and I'm going to store this inside a variable called as user ID and pass this user ID to the subscribe to user method, right? Now we have the user ID. So what I can do now is to test whether this callback is actually working or not, and whether the user is registered in the database or not. So as you can see as I've already shown you in the previous example, I have logged in as a different user who is not yet registered in the database, right? So when I access the callback URL, what I want to see here is I want to see another entry in the database with my user details, like the email and the first name and the last name details, with my user details saved to the database, right? So let's test whether this is working or not. So I'm going to open the application. I'm just going to call a URL called as callback. And here you can see that we are displaying the text callback works. That means our Angular application should have called the Spring Boot backend, and it should have already saved my user details to the database, right? Let's verify whether this is the case or not. So I'm going to open the MongoDB application, MongoDB one more time. I'm just going to refresh, and you can see that another user has been created. Another user has been created inside the database. And if I just try to refresh, you can see that again we see the text callback works, but in the database, storing the user detail one more time. And this is a bug, right? It should not happen. Like with one user, it should only store this user inside the database only one time, as the subject is same for both these users. So you can see that it starts with Google Auth 2 and ends with 7297. And also the second record, it starts with Google Auth 2 and ends with 7297. So there is a bug on our side. So let's try to fix this bug now. So I'm opening the user controller and going to the registered user, and okay, so this is not really a bug. This is just a stupid mistake from my side. I just didn't restart the application whenever I've made the changes. So let's restart the application. So guys, just remember to always restart the application whenever you made the changes. Alternatively, you can make use of Spring Boot DevTools, so that it has a live reload. Maybe we have to use this in our project. I didn't use it, so we can save some time to fix this kind of silly bugs. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to again go to the database and remove this extra record which is just created right now. So I'm just going to click on document and just remove document. And now I'm going to call this callback URL one more time. I'm just going to refresh, and I'm going to open the database. And now you can see that the user is not saved multiple times to the database. So it's just one entry you see with this subject. So in this way, we can make sure that the user is registered in our application. So one thing here you may have noticed is whenever we are calling the callback URL, we are just showing the text callback works, but this is not we should see, right? Like we should see something like redirecting, and we have to redirect back the user to the home page. Like this is the localhost 4200. We have to redirect the user back to the home page. So that's how usually the authentication will also work, right? So let's try to do that. Whenever we are initializing the callback component, we are making the call to the Spring Boot backend to register the user. And after this is completed, we will redirect the page to the home page. So for that, I'm going to open the callback component. So I'm just going to call callback.component.ts file. And after the registration is completed, so here I want to redirect to the home page. For that, I'm going to need the Angular router callback component class. So I'm just going to try inject router from Angular router package. And I'm going to type in this router navigate by URL, and I'm just going to pass in empty string as the URL here. So this will redirect us back to the home page. So let's test whether this is working or not. I'm just going to open localhost 4200 callback, and you can see that instantly it's redirected back us to the home page. So everything happened in an instant. So in this way we can make sure that the user is saved to the database after the login is completed. So now let's continue with what we were doing before. So we were inside the subscribe to user method. So we have got the user ID and we are subscribed to the user. And if you go to the subscribe to user method, here we are making a post call to the subscribe endpoint, and we are receiving a boolean as a response. So if the subscribe is completed successfully as a response, right? So I'm going to subscribe to this data subscribe user endpoint, and I'm going to, so when the user is subscribed, what we have to do is we have to hide the subscribe button, right? So if you open so once the user is subscribed, I have to hide the subscribe button and show the subscribed button, right? And when the user is unsubscribed, I have to show the subscribe button, and vice versa. So we can control this. Using the Boolean variables and the ng if statement. So for that, I can create two variables inside our video detail component.ts file. So this is going to be, one is going to be show subscribe button, and this is going to be a boolean, which is going to be true by default, and I'm going to show unsubscribe button, which is going to be false by default, right? So after receiving the response from the subscribe to user endpoint, I'm just going to assign this dot show unsubscribe button as true, and this dot show subscribe button as false, right? Similarly, when we are clicking on unsubscribe, when we are to unsubscribe, we want to show the unsubscribe button, we have to hide the unsubscribe button and show the subscribe button. So I'm just going to copy this whole subscribe to user method one more time and call it as unsubscribe user, and I'm going to call this as unsubscribe user. So I'm going to create this unsubscribe user method inside the user service class. So just I can go inside the subscribe to user method. I can copy the existing method and just rename it as unsubscribe user. And instead of calling subscribe, I want to call unsubscribe endpoint, right? So just verify what is the correct URL mapping. So this is going to be unsubscribe with a capital S. So I'm going to just replace this subscribe with unsubscribe. I'm going to open the video detail.component.ts file, and in here we have defined the unsubscribe method, and inside, once we have unsubscribed from the user, we have to show subscription button. So that means it should be true instead of false, and we have to hide the unsubscribe button. So this is going to be false here. right? So here we have these two variables. Now let's show the buttons subscribe and unsubscribe based on these two variables. So I'm just going to go back to the video detail component.html file, and in here I want to show this button only if the ngIf condition has show subscribe button, and similarly I want to show the subscribed button if has show unsubscribe button. And I'm also going to add the click directive for the unsubscribe button. So this is going to be click equals unsubscribe to user. And finally, instead of showing the text as subscribed, I'm just going to rename this text as unsubscribe so that it's more obvious what is happening, right? So after clicking, so now let's open the application and see that by default we are seeing the subscribe button here, and if I click on the subscribe button we expect this to change to unsubscribe. This is not happening because we are receiving an error inside the console. We are making a call to the subscribe endpoint without the path variable here. So this is interesting because we are receiving the user ID from the register endpoint without any problems. So let's check whether everything is working fine or not. So I've just called the callback URL, and if I open the network tab, you can see that the register endpoint is returning the user ID, but in the console there is an error. Okay, so this is the error which we are getting inside the browser, right? So our register endpoint is returning a response as a text. It's not returning as a JSON, as it is just returning a string. The response is of type string, but our HTTP client is expecting the response as a JSON object, right? So that's why we have this OK as false, as it's expecting a JSON object as a HTTP response. So for this reason, I think the user ID is not assigned correctly to the user ID variable. So to fix this error, what we have to do is we have to define the response type as text whenever we are making the HTTP GET call. So I can do that by adding additional options to the GET method. So I am going to type in an object called as response type, and this is going to be text, right? So we just have to provide some options to the GET call along with the URL, so that which defines the response type as text. And now you can see that we are receiving some error inside the response type field. This is because we have already defined the response type as text. That means the return type would be of type string, right? So there is no need to add this generic arguments one more time. It's just we are just repeating ourselves. So that's why I'm just going to delete this generic argument, and now the error is gone. So let's test whether everything is working fine now or not. I'm just going to open, and as we did the change, we have to call the callback URL one more time, right? So I'm just going to call the callback URL one more time and going to the video and click on the subscribe button, and now you can see that it has changed to the unsubscribe button. That means the call to the backend was successful and we are showing the unsubscribe button here. And let's also try to unsubscribe now, and you can see that we are displaying the subscribe button, and we can do this multiple times. Alright, so now it's time to implement the comment functionality inside our video detail page. So for that, first I'm going to open IntelliJ, and I'm going to first create a new component called as comments. So for that, I'm just going to type in, similar to all the components, I'm going to type in ng-gc comments, right? This will again create 4 files: the HTML spec.ts, component.ts file, and the CSS file. Alright, so now I'm going to add again the 4 files to my local Git repository, and now inside the comments.component.html file, we have to create the markup file, the HTML code, to show a form with a text area, and also below the form we have to show the list of comments which are already existing for this particular video. So now let's go ahead and implement that. So for that, I'm going to again make use of the HTML file inside the GitHub guest. So I'm just going to copy everything inside the comments component.html file, and I'm going to open IntelliJ, and inside the comments component.html file, I'm just going to paste everything as it is. And now let's have a look at what's happening inside this particular code. First of all, we have the form field here, where we are first displaying a text area inside a mat form field. So a mat form field is nothing but a basic tag which represents a field inside a form. And here we have first a label and a text area which is taking an attribute called as mat input. And after that we have a row, like a div with a row, and in that div we are taking the 40% of the last 40% of the div, and we are showing two buttons, a button called cancel and a button called comment, right? So this comment button is like a type submit. So whenever we click on this comment button, we have to post this comment to the backend. And similarly, we also have another button called mat cancel. Just the normal button which does nothing as of now. And we have a mat divider to divide the comment form and the comments which are existing in the database, right? So for the given video, we have to display all the comments just below the form. So for that, we have a separate div, and inside that we have a row, and this row is divided into two parts with 50%. The first 50%, we are displaying the details about the comment author of the comment. So we have a mat card header where we are displaying the avatar, and after that a link to the user, and also like some hard-coded text like when the comment is added to this video, right? And after that, in the next 50% of the part, we just have a normal icon called as delete, and below these two divs we have actual comment text, right? So this is also the hard-coded comment text. Now, if you open the application and have a look at it, so this is how the comment forms looks like. It's just a normal text area field, and in the next line we have this cancel and comment methods, comment buttons to the right side of the div here, and just below that we have some sample comments which we are displaying for this particular video, right? So now let's also copy the CSS files from the GitHub guest page so that we can just make it look half decent, right? So I'm just going to copy everything from here and paste it inside the comments component.css file. So if I open now the application, and now you can see that it looks quite better. It's like slightly better than before. We have some nice input animation here for the text area, where we are displaying the placeholder of the text area in the background, like share your thoughts. And if I just click outside of this text area, you don't see the placeholder anymore. And again, as previously mentioned, if you have any questions about this implementation of the CSS or HTML, just write a comment and mention me, and I'll try to help you as soon as possible. So the next step is to make this form functional, so that whenever we type in some data into this particular comment form, we have to post this comment to the backend and display the comments which are existing in the database inside this list, right? So let's go ahead and do this as the next step. So the first step I'm going to do as part of the implementation is to create something called as a form group inside our comments component. And for that, I'm just going to go inside the comments component, and inside here I'm just going to define a form group called as comments form, and I'm going to use the class form group. Define this as a type of form group coming from Angular forms package, and we have to initialize this form inside the constructor. So I'm just going to type in this dot comment form equals new form group, and this form group is going to contain the form control. So whatever field we have inside the form, we have to provide it as a form control. So we have a text area called as text area which contains the comments, right? So for that, I'm just going to create a form control called as comment. So I'm just going to type in comment and type in new form control. and I'm going to provide the name of the form control. So it's going to be comment. And now I have to refer this comments form inside the HTML file and also assign the form control to the text area inside the HTML file. So for that, I'm just going to copy this comments form variable and just going to the form tag of the comments component HTML file, and as I'm going to add the form group directive, and I have to provide the comments form variable as a form group here, so that Angular understands that this particular form is assigned to the comments form group. And next we also have a text area. For that we have created a form control. So I'm going to add this form control directive for this text area. So it's nothing but form control name is going to be comment. So I'm just going to add this inside single quotes so that the form control understands, so that Angular understands this is a variable called as comment, but it's just not an absolute value comment provided to the form control name directive, right? So as we are referring to a variable, we have to provide single quotes for the comment variable. The next thing we have to do is to add a click directive for the comments button. So whenever the user types in the comment and clicks on the comment button, we have to post this content to the backend, right? So for that, I'm just going to add click directive, and I'm going to define a method called as post comment. And this post comment method is still not existing inside the component. So I'm just going to create this post comment method. And inside the post comment method, I have to first retrieve the data, whatever data is typed inside this text area, right? So for that, I can just retrieve and I can just refer to this particular form control name comment, and I can just get the value of whatever value is present inside the text area through the form control name, right? So for that, I'm just going to type in this dot comments form dot get, and I'm going to get the form control name for comment, right? So I'm just going to type in comment, and I'm going to type in dot value. So this will fetch the whatever data, whatever comment the user has typed in the text area. So I'm just going to assign this particular value to a variable called as comment, and after getting the comment, we have to make a call to the backend, right? So for that, I have to prepare the request body for the backend call. So if you have a look at the payload, like the endpoint inside the video controller, to add a comment, we have to provide the video ID as a path variable, and we have a comment DTO as a request body, right? So we have to prepare a request in the type of comment DTO. So for that, we just need comment text and author ID, right? So it's nothing but the user ID of the currently logged in user who would be the author of the comment, right? So for that, I'm just going to create a new object called as const comment DTO, and this object is going to contain fields called comment text, right? It's going to be comment, and this comment text is going to be referring to the variable comment. And lastly, we also have the author ID, right? For the author ID, we have to provide the user ID of the currently logged in user. So for that, I'm just going to make use of the user service. I'm going to inject the user service into the comments component and make sure to import the user service from the root package. And I'm just going to type in this dot user service dot get user ID. So after we've created the request body, the comment DTO, the next step is to make actually the HTTP call to the backend. So for that, I'm just going to open the terminal and create a service called as comment service. So I'm going to type in nggs comments. So this will create again the comment service and the comment service spec.ts file. I'm going to these two files, I'm just going to add this into the local git repository. Here inside the comment service, as we have to make a HTTP call to the backend, again I need to have access to the HTTP client. So I'm just going to inject this HTTP client into our comment service class. So I'm going to type in private HTTP client and import the HTTP client class from Angular common HTTP module, right? And after I've injected the HTTP client, I can just create a method called post comment, and this will take input argument of type called comment DTO, and as this is a generic JSON object, I'm just going to add the type as any, right? And inside this post comment method, I'm just going to type in this dot http client dot post, and I'm going to make a post request to the endpoint which is defined here, which is slash API slash videos, and followed by video ID and the comment, right? So for that, I'm just going to go back to the comment service. I'm going to type in http localhost 8080 slash API slash videos, and here we have to get access to the video ID. We don't have the video ID yet, so I can receive the video ID. So if I open the comments component, you can see that we will use this comments component inside the video detail page anyway, right? So here what I can do is I can pass in the video ID. Here we can pass in the video ID as an input comments component. So I'm just going to type in video ID. We don't have this particular input variable here inside the comments component yet. So for that, I'm just going to type in video ID, and inside the app comments component, I'm just going to add a variable called as video ID. This is going to be a string, and this is going to be an empty string by default. So let's define this as an empty string, and let's add the decorator as input, right? Because as we are receiving this video ID as an input from the video detail component HTML file, right? So now we have access to the video ID inside the comments component. What I can do is I can pass this video ID as an input argument to the post comment method. So I can just add this video ID as a method parameter inside the post comment method, and now I can just concatenate this video ID to the URL, and I can close the URL with /comment. And finally, as we are doing a post call, and this time we have the request body, so I'm just going to type in the request body as comment DTO. Now if you have a look at the response which is returned by this add comment endpoint, we are not receiving any response. We are just returning a void as a response back from the backend, right? So for that we are for this reason I'm just added the argument, the generic argument for the post method call as any, and we are going to return an observable. Even though we are not receiving any response from the backend, we are going to return an observable of type any, because the comments component can subscribe to this method call post comment, and once this method call is successfully completed, try to do other tasks like show a notification that the comment is posted successfully. So now let's call this method from inside the comments component class. So for this, I'm going to first inject the comments service inside the comments component, and we also need to display some kind of notification message like we do for whenever we have saved the video metadata details, right? So if I open the save video details component.ts file, and if I just scroll down until I find the save video method, after we are saving the video details, we are showing this mat snack bar, right, with the text video metadata updated successfully. So we want to do something similar also in this case. So for this reason, I'm also going to inject mat snack bar class into the comments component constructor, and inside the post comment method, I'm just going to call this dot comment service dot post comment, and I'm going to pass in the comment DTO and the video ID, right? So now I have to display a notification after the comment is posted successfully, right? For that, I'm just going to subscribe to the observable which is returned from the comment service, and inside the subscription, I'm just going to type in this dot mat snackbar dot open, and I'm going to show the message as comment posted successfully, and I'm going to show an action message as okay, right? And after showing this notification message, we also want to clear the previous data of the comment, right? So whenever we post some data, post some text inside the comment, whenever you click on the post button, you have to clear this comment so that you can type a new comment maybe in the future, right? So for this reason, I'm just going to clear the text inside the comment text area by typing this dot comments form and dot get, I'm going to type in the form control name as comment, and I'm going to use the method called as reset, which will clear the text inside this particular form control. So let's test whether this is working fine or not. So I'm just going to open the application. I'm just going to type in, this is my first comment, and click on the comment button. And you can see that we are displaying the notification bar, the snack bar, and also the previous comment is cleared from the text area. So the next step is to display whatever comments we have posted inside this section, right? Inside the view comment section. So to view the comments, it's pretty straightforward. To implement the functionality, I just have to call the get all comments method, that all comments endpoint from the backend inside our comments component. So I have to do it at the time of initializing this component. So the better place would be to add this inside the constructor. So whenever the component is loaded, we will show all the comments which are there in the there in the database for this particular video. So for this, I'm just going to first define a new method inside the comment service. So I'm just going to anyway initialize this inside the constructor by typing this.commentService.get all comments, and we also need to provide the video ID to this get all comments method. So just I'm going to type in this.video ID, and I'm going to create this get all comments method inside the comment service class. And now I'm to make a HTTP GET call to our Spring Boot backend. So I'm just going to type in this.http client.get, and I'm going to add the URL as http localhost 8080/API/videos. I'm going to again concatenate the video ID to the URL, and I'm going to end the URL with the request mapping /comment. And if you have a look at the video controller, you can see that we are returning a list of comment DTO as a response for the get all comments. So in the comment DTO, we have the comment text and the author ID as the two fields, right? So be able to receive this in a similar type also in our Angular application. The better thing would be to create a DTO TypeScript file, just like how we did for the video DTO.ts file. Either we can create a TypeScript file called as comment.dto.ts, and we can then specify this as a return type of the get all comments endpoint call. So for that, I'm just going to go to the root level of our application. I'm just going to collapse all these folders, and I'm just going to right click on the app folder and going to say new file, and I'm going to call this file as comment.dto.ts, and I'm going to type in export interface comment.dto, and in this interface we want to have two fields. The one is comment text, which is of type string, right? And we want to have another one called as author ID, which is like a string. Now we have the comment.dto interface ready. So what we can do is we can just add this as a return type inside the get generic arguments, and also add the return statement, so that this method will return an observable of a list, an observable of type a list of comment DTOs, right? So we also have to define this return type for the get all comments method. So I'm just going to type in observable and type in array of comment DTO, right? And we are getting a compilation error because here we have defined the generic argument as just a comment DTO, but we are returning an array of comment DTO, right? So for this reason, we have to just add the array declaration also here inside the generic arguments for the get method. Now we can go back to the comment component.ts file, and in here you can see that we are calling this get all comments method. Now I'm going to subscribe to this response which is coming from the backend, and I'm going to assign this to an array called as comments DTO, which is of type comments DTO array, and this is going to be an empty array by default. So inside the subscription, I'm going to assign this dot comments DTO equals data. So in this way, we can assign the comments which we are reading from the database to this variable called as comments.do. And now we have to display all the comments which are inside this comments.do inside our application, right? So for that, what I can do is I have to go to the HTML file and I can do a loop over this view comments section, right? I can loop through all the comments inside the comments.do and show the text for each comment. So for that, I'm just going to use ng-for and type the declaration for each comment as let comment comments.do, and I'm going to, instead of showing the hard-coded text as comment text, I'm just going to bind this comment and show the field called as comment text. Now if you open the application, so if I try to open the application and try to load the comments, you can see that this is not working. This is because we are loading the comments at the time of creating this component inside the constructor. But a better thing to do is to load the comments when the component is actually initialized, right? Because we are using the video ID, which is coming from the video from the say video details component, from the video details component. So a better place to read all the comments would be inside the ng-on-init method instead of the constructor. So I'm just going to move this inside the ng-on-init method, and I'm also going to call this particular piece of code also inside the subscription of the post comment method, because whenever we have created a new comment, we want to update this comment inside the list, right? So for this reason, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a method called as get comments, right? And in here, I'm going to move this particular piece of code. Whenever it's needed, I'm just going to call this get comments method from multiple places, right? So for the first place, I have to call this inside the ng-on-init method, right? So I'm just going to type in this dot get comments. And also, once the comment is posted successfully, I want to get all comments one more time. So I'm just going to paste in here just after resetting the text area for the comments. I'm going to get all the comments and update the comments with the latest comments, right? So let's test whether this is working or not. I'm just going to open the application, and as you can see that I've already created some comments in the background, so that's why you can see multiple comments here. So I'm going to type in another comment called as this is my latest comment, and you can see that the latest comment is with comment AAA, and if I type on comment, you can see that this is my latest comment is updated. So you can see that the comment list is updated with the latest comment. So we have implemented all the functionality inside the video detail page. We can of course view the video, we can like the video and click on subscribe and unsubscribe from the video. And the last thing which is remaining is to make some small changes. We have to implement the logout, and whenever we click on this video icon, we have to move to the upload video page, right? So we're just going to add some small changes. So implementing the logout is pretty straightforward, and what we want to do is whenever we click on this user icon, I want to see a menu item with an option called as logout, right? For this, I can make use of Angular material. So for that, I'm just going to go to the components inside the material.angular.io website, and I'm just going to search for the component called as menu. And I want to show a basic menu like this, right? So I just want to see these two items like item 1 and item 2. And instead of item 1, I just want to display the option called as logout. So for this, I'm just going to view the code. How is this implemented? And you can see that this is kind of using a menu called as mat menu. And let's see how we are implementing this inside our application. If you go to the header component.html file, as of now, we are just displaying a mat icon. So instead of a mat icon, I want to now display a menu, right? So for this, I'm just going to go back to Angular website, and I'm going to copy this mat menu code. So copy this code which contains the mat menu tag and paste this just below this button. And I also want to add this mat menu trigger for menu attribute, so that whenever this button is clicked, we want to show this menu item, right? Also paste it under the button tag, right? So for this, you can see that we are already seeing some kind of compilation errors. This is because we want to import the Angular module for mat menu. So for that, I'm just going to import. So for this, I'm just going to import the mat menu module from Angular material menu package. So if I just click on this import option, you can see that the mat menu module will be added to the imports array of the ng module declaration, and also make sure to import this mat menu module from Angular material menu package. So if I go back to the header component, now whenever we click on this button, we have to see these two menu items, item 1 and item 2. Let's see whether this is working or not. I'm going to our application, and if I click on the circle on the icon, you can see that we already see these two options. That's good. So let's quickly go back to our IntelliJ, go back to the header component HTML file and change the text of this menu item from item 1 to logout, right? And when I click on this button, I want to again do some logic in the background, like where we are actually logging out the user from the application. So similar to what we are doing for login, I'm also going to add a click action for this button, and I'm going to call it as log off. So if you remember, we have already implemented this log off method. So by calling the log off and revoke tokens method from the OIDC security service, which will log off and revoke tokens from auth0. And this looks fine. And let's go back to our application and test whether the logout is working or not. So if I click on logout, you can see that nothing happens. This is because we are revoking and we are logging off and revoking the token in the auth0 server, in the authorization server. To be able to also revoke the tokens and log out in our application, we also have to add a small line of code to the log off logic. So just below the log off and revoke tokens method call, I'm going to add this dot OIDC security service dot log off local. Right? This will do is it will also clear off all the tokens which are stored inside locally, and will also log off from the Angular application. So now if I open the browser and if I click on logout, you can see that the tokens are also, now you can see that the login button is displayed. That means in the background, the application has logged the user out. So in this way, we can implement also the logout functionality. And the last thing I want to do is to create a link between this particular icon and the upload video component, right? So for that, I'm just going to go back to IntelliJ, to the header component.html file. And inside this button, which contains the icon, video call icon, I'm just going to add a router link as /upload video, right? You can just verify whether this is a correct router path or not by going to the app routing.module.ts file. And here you can see that the upload video path is the same one as we have typed in inside the router link attribute. So let's check whether this is working or not. If I click on this particular icon, now we are navigated to the upload video page. This is fine.